ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Avian influenza has been around forever. Well, since the late 1870s. And since then, there have been many outbreaks. Now, bird flu is spreading around the world again. Farms in Victoria have now been hit, and we've had our first human case reported this month. But how concerned should we be? Today, an epidemiologist tells us. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
I'm Raina MacIntyre, Professor of Global Biosecurity at the Kirby Institute, UNSW.
Raina, we normally have you on, of course, to talk about COVID, and there is a fair bit of that around at the moment, isn't there?
There is. It's on the rise at the moment.
Coughing, sneezing, wheezing. They're telltale signs of illness, and of late, it seems more of us are getting sick. One driver is a spike in COVID.
I've also got a bit of a virus. I'm not sure which one though. Anyway, there's a fair bit around, a bit of flu, a bit of COVID. There's some nasty colds and pneumonia, I think, all around at the moment, so it's not a great time. But to add to that, there's also bird flu. And we're increasingly worried about that, aren't we? Because it has shown up in humans as well as birds. Just explain the strains for me, because they're different.
Sure. So the strains that have caused the poultry farm outbreaks in Victoria are H7N3 and H7N9, and that in itself is quite unusual to see two different poultry outbreaks with different strains virtually simultaneously. So those are both high pathogenic strains, which means they make the birds really sick or they kill the birds. And then the one that's affected the dairy farms in the US and really has spread all over the world, except Australia, is H5N1, a particular clade called clade 2.3.4.4b, which emerged around 2020 and really took off in 2021. And it's had a very different pattern to any other avian flu in the past, because since it started really spreading in 2021, it's never gone away. Instead of subsiding, it's just continued to escalate, and it spread geographically in an unprecedented way and to a range of new species like different wild birds and different wild animals that have not been infected in the past. It's also shifted the epicenter of avian flu from Asia, where it's always been the major hotspot, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, to Europe and the Americas. So now we have the highest chance of a human pandemic arising either in Europe or the Americas.
Because this strain of bird flu can infect humans.
Well, this strain of bird flu at the moment will only infect humans in close contact with it, which is what we've seen in the US. There's been 2 dairy farm workers who've become infected. It's not yet adapted for spread in humans, but the more it spreads and the more it spreads around areas where human beings have contact with it, the more chance there is of it adapting to become transmissible in humans, and that's what we're worried about.
But just tell me then about this human case here in Australia at a hospital in Victoria.
The case in Australia was a 2-year-old girl who had travelled to India and acquired the infection there. The child was quite critically ill but made a full recovery. According to what's been made public, there were no risk factors, so the child did not have close contact with poultry or birds or with sick animals or with sick human beings. So it's a bit of a mystery how she acquired it, but that was a different H5N1 to the one that we've been talking about and the one affecting the US dairy farms. It's a clade that's been circulating in India and Bangladesh since 2009. So it's a different H5N1.
Wow, okay, that all gets quite confusing, doesn't it? So in this case with the child, they've contained the virus. It hasn't spread beyond that child, I presume.
No, it hasn't spread beyond that child. But strangely, the incident occurred in March and we didn't hear about it till May the 22nd, which was the same day the poultry outbreaks in the farms were announced. So I'm not sure why there was such a long delay in reporting that case publicly. The genome sequence from that child was also deposited into the global gene sharing database called GISAID on that same day, the 22nd of May. So for some reason, it was kept under wraps for a couple of months.
Gosh, okay, well, that's interesting and intriguing. Just tell me more about these farms in Victoria. As you say, the birds get incredibly ill, and of course that's resulted, hasn't it, in mass culls on farms in Victoria. Tell me about that.
Yes, so the only way to control those outbreaks is by culling the birds, and so they've had to cull, enormous numbers of birds, which obviously has a massive economic impact on poultry farmers.
Well, at first my heart sunk to the ground when I found out. I mean, I pride ourselves on our birds being out every day of the year. So this is, in 15 years of farming, this is the first time we've ever had to do this.
So they had their team come in to depopulate the entire farm, and they had a team of contractors come in to dispose of the turkeys, the litter, the mulch, the soil, anything that a bird could have come into contact with.
And to me, it's very odd that there have been in Australia, which has been quite protected from avian flu outbreaks in the past, that we've had 2 outbreaks virtually simultaneously with 2 different highly pathogenic avian flu viruses. The reason why we've been spared from avian flu outbreaks, one of the reasons is it's spread by ducks, geese and swans when they're migrating, and they migrate very long distances from Asia. And they migrate along specific paths called flyways, and those flyways bypass Australia. That's why we've been spared. If you were expecting anything to turn up in Australia, it would have been H5N1, because there's now all these other birds, like over 100 different species of wild birds that are not ducks, geese or swans or waterfowl, that have completely different flyways. So, and we've got the infection in Antarctica now. There could be other routes for it to enter Australia, which is why it's a surprise that we've seen H7N3 and H7N9 in rapid succession.
Yeah, I think we've all seen the images now of the penguins in Antarctica, and it's really concerning, of course, for poultry farmers across the country, but particularly in Victoria. Danielle Cucinotta, she's a 3rd-generation egg farmer in Victoria and the Vice President of the Farmers Federation there, and she is really worried. It is a really concerning time.
Because we are all interconnected. We do work together. We do have limited suppliers. We're trying to work out, where do we stop? How do we limit movements? Do we let the contractors in next week? Do we change our schedules for the birds that come in or birds that go out? And it's been a really, really stressful few days.
Is it inevitable that this spreads to other farms, or can it be contained at this point?
No, not at all. It's not inevitable. Australia's had 8 of these H7 type outbreaks in the past, from the 1970s onwards, so very infrequently, but we have had them before, and they've been contained quite effectively by culling of the birds. I guess we just need to have really good surveillance and be vigilant. That includes looking for mass die-offs of wild birds and wild animals. That could be a signal that there is avian flu. Since February, actually, we've been hearing about little penguins dying in South Australia, mass die-offs, and I would assume they've been tested for H5N1 and found to be negative, but that's the kind of thing we need to keep an eye out for.
So how likely do you think it is that we could have another bird flu pandemic, firstly overseas? Is that looking likely at this point among humans?
Yeah, I think the risk is higher than it's ever been before, and I would expect that risk to be highest in Europe, the US, or, the Americas, or maybe in Africa, because by the patterns of migration and the way it's spread, it seems that those are the places where it's most widespread, and it's spreading not just in, the usual ducks, swans and geese, but in hundreds of other wild birds and also in wild animals, including animals like foxes and coyotes and squirrels that live in close proximity to humans and to domestic pets. So, pets can get infected. They have been infected. We've seen cats being infected on the poultry farms, for example, who've been fed the raw milk. And so there's just so many other pathways by which the virus can adapt to transmit efficiently in humans.
And Raina, just tell me, what are the symptoms in humans? Is it quite dangerous, this virus, for humans?
So the H5N1s, of all the human cases that have occurred, the average rate of death is 50%. So it's very, very serious. While it's an avian virus, if it adapts to humans, we would expect that case fatality rate to come down, but it's still going to be much, much more severe, orders of magnitude more severe than the COVID pandemic was.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. That's really concerning. What about vaccines? We were playing catch up with COVID, of course, but can we be ahead with vaccines in this case?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And we're better placed for influenza than we were for COVID because we have a long history of making flu vaccines, including in Australia, and flu vaccines are flu vaccines. Every year we have to match them to what we think is going to be the circulating strain, and it's exactly the same with the pandemic flu strain. You just have to have the vaccine matched to that strain. In 2009, for example, we had the first case in the pandemic in May in Australia, and the vaccines were ready in September. But it's going to be a lot faster than with COVID, which was still pretty good, like a year. And we've got mRNA manufacturing facilities in Australia. So we should be, able to get that underway quickly as well.
Just tell me then, Raina, how quickly do you think a pandemic could emerge in places like Europe, the Americas, in the United States?
I mean, I'm really worried right now, that those conditions are there. It's all about statistical probability, right, of this avian virus adapting, and that happens either by mixing with human flu viruses or mixing in animals that are quite similar to humans in terms of our respiratory tract and the way we receive a flu virus. And pigs, for example, are the ideal genetic mixing vessel for a pandemic because they have similar respiratory tract makeup to humans.
And as Australians, how concerned should we be? What's your message there?
So it'll be like COVID, if it arises, wherever it arises, it'll come to Australia at some point. With COVID, what we saw was closure of the international borders, and that actually bought us very valuable time until the vaccines were ready. So we didn't see, the sort of collapse of hospitals and bodies piling up in refrigerator trucks like we saw in New York or Barcelona or Bergamo in Italy. We had everything under good control because we were able to get people vaccinated before all the restrictions were relaxed and borders were opened. So I think using open source intelligence to get early warnings of influenza-like illness, pneumonia signals, etc., and really focusing on Europe and the Americas as the possible source, maybe Africa as well, could give us a heads up in terms of being prepared for it hitting our shores.
Raina MacIntyre is an epidemiologist from the University of New South Wales. This episode was produced by Jess O'Callaghan, Bridget Fitzgerald and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Anna John. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.